Welcome to the Writer Reads Chronicles of a Dark God, Book 2, Dark Gods Rise, Chapter 46 of Elementals and the Gods. While Shira raged within the gem, the intruders in the citadel heard his cries of denial and fought the savagery of his spells within the courtyard. Alessia fought him most of all. Long after the other mages had run out of spells to throw against him, she drew and drew and drew yet more power from the well within her. And in drawing, she came to recognize the power that was her own. By accepting that power, she came to suspect more was happening to her than her gaining access to a new source of magical energy. She came to suspect something of the transformation taking place in her soul, that she should be chosen. She shrugged the thought away, having no time to entertain it as she fended off another of the Old One's attacks. Not letting the assault distract her, she moved with the others. Powerful or no, she couldn't afford to be caught away from her escorts, and the transformation was far from complete. Until it was done, she could not hope to face the Old One on her own. The protection of the citadel folded around her as they reached the top of the steps. It troubled her that while Shiro should be able to exercise his power anywhere in the citadel, the forecourt included, he was imprisoned. He should not have been able to do anything at all. This puzzlement stayed with her as they crossed the forecourt and walked down the corridor that led to the garden. Here the elementals were waiting, but not the Old One's creatures. These were the guardians of the garden, and they stood forth to protect it now. Raomar's company, drained of spells for either protection or defense, drew their blades and prepared to fight their way to the center, and Walshira's failing prison. They were interrupted by a shaking of the earth, and the garden's guardians divided their attention between the intruders and this new disruption. Some of the guardians turned to see what would have dared this intrusion into their domain. The others kept their attention on the intruders, watching as Alessia came to stand at Raomar's side. Sindra moved up beside her, and Brianda drifted to the rear of the group. Her part, she thought, was over. The earth shook and bubbled, and the head of a huge earth elemental broke the ground. He pulled himself from the earth, and ignoring the invading magic users and knights, bowed to the waiting guardians. "Hold your wrath," he commanded. "There is trouble within the Old One's prison, and we have brought another gem to contain him." Surveying the gathered elementals, he continued, "The lords and the mortals' gods have commanded it be so." He paused as though to give his next words more weight than they already carried. "The Old One is close to shattering his first prison and breaking free." His words were met by a series of unsettled growls, and the garden shook, but not from the outrage of its guardians. As the knights and wizards struggled to keep their feet and priests reached for unresponsive deities, trees tilted at alarming angles and bushes were shaken free of the earth. The network of streamlets seaming the garden changed course, and the very garden itself seemed like it was coming to life. It was not. It was another elemental rising, and this one was far greater than the first earthly intruder. Before any of the gathered mortals could demand who or what it was, it gave the answer. "I am lord of this garden," it said. "Incursions such as the one you propose must go through me, or they will fail." Raomar went to one knee, but Alessia lifted her face to meet its gaze, enraptured by the sight. The garden elemental lowered its gaze to study her, and its expression softened, as much as any expression created by earth and stone could soften. "Step forth, lady," it commanded, "that I may know the truth of what your people claim." Raomar felt the wizardess tremble, and he didn't blame her. The suppressed power in the creature's voice tremored through him, too. He laid a hand on the wizardess's arm. As much as he dreaded doing so, he wanted the wizardess to know he'd defend her if she chose to disobey. It was a relief when Alessia covered his hand with her own, before gently removing it from her arm. He released her as she stepped away, resisting the urge to either follow or interpose himself between them. He watched as the creature lowered its head so its eyes could look into Alessia's, and Raomar stifled a cry of protest when the wizardess reached out and laid a hand on the elemental's cheek. They communed silently for a moment. Then the creature blinked momentarily, shuttering its green gold eyes before accepting the wizardess's gaze once more. Alessia swayed, and Raomar thought she might fall, or worse, allow herself to be devoured. He called to her and didn't think she heard until she waved a hand for him to remain where he was. It was the hardest thing he'd yet had to do. Watch as his friend stepped into the elemental's side and allowed herself to be encased within its skin. Still, he couldn't help rising to his feet and taking a step toward her as she disappeared. Immediately, two of the garden's guardians moved to intercept him. Our Lord seeks answers, one told him. She will be returned unharmed, the other said. Raomar stopped, peering past them to where the elemental lord remained statue still, and Alessia unseen. He didn't realize he was holding his breath until the lord's hide parted, and an unharmed Alessia stepped free. For a moment Raomar's gaze met that of the lord's, and he saw satisfaction and compassion in its gaze. Compassion? But the elemental interrupted him before he could pursue the thought. Its gaze had returned to the wizardess, and its voice was gentle as it addressed her. You may enter the garden as often as you wish, it told her, then returned its gaze to Raomar. And to you, the god's appointed guardian, I bid welcome. With a sigh, the great creature sank once more into the earth. As it went, the garden's streams returned to their courses. The bushes were rerouted by tendrils of earth, and the trees righted themselves. The lesser elementals blocking their path parted to form a guard of honor for those accompanying the wizardess and the citadel's newly recognized guardian. Hesitantly, Raomar stepped forward, holding out his hand to steady Alessia as she joined him. The earth trembled beneath their feet, and they took several hasty paces back. As they did so, another elemental emerged, partially wrapped around an enormous gem. The large elemental that had preceded it looked smug, and Raomar bowed toward it, acknowledging it and those who had emerged beside it. And inspecting the gem, his heart lifted at the sight of it. Well done, he said. We may have need of that if our gemsmith cannot restore the prison's integrity. The minor elemental lord bowed in return. As you say, my lord, it replied, and settled to the side of the path, curving itself protectively around the gem as it did so. We will await your command. In his prison, while Shira writhed and twisted, his shadowed talons raking at the fissure he had created, the battle had weakened him, he realized, as his talons made no more progress than they had before. He needed to feed. With a long roll of bitter laughter, he sent his power forth and manifested himself within the king's temple, his temple, and the source of his power. The king was waiting, his need for both food and pleasure sated. Sensing his deity's arrival, he dropped to his knees and bowed his head. While Shira's manifestation ignored him, and the king rose cautiously to watch the old one's smoky form wisping between the sacrifices hanging from the temple's pillars and walls. There were more there now, and the remains of those the captain of his guard had devoured had been overhung with others. The walls were almost full, and the pillars were like trees overloaded with ripened fruit. There was a stillness in the chamber. No sound or struggle marred the waiting, not even when Walshira's presence drifted over them. The king clicked his fingers, and the spell he had cast broke, and the stasis nullified by his will. As soon as he had, one of the mages began to chant. Walshira turned to him like smoke swirling on an invisible breeze, and the man's chant died in a whisper, choked by fear. Walshira took him, tearing his soul from the still living body and devouring it, while the soulless mind looked on in horror. The mage shrieked, and Walshira sucked the life from him as the man's mind swirled into madness. When the old one was done, the body was a brittle grey thing, and its cries nothing more than echoes. The other wizards hung in mortified silence as the deity's smoky form swirled through the wizardess hanging nearby. He morphed so he took on the semblance of human form, smiling with dusky lips and tracing his finger down her cheek with a touch that made her whimper. Far beyond the temple and citadel halls, another deity returned to the realms of the gods. Adriel shuddered with exhaustion and felt an answering tremor in the messenger he rode. Crouching low over the messenger's neck, he wondered if the flight would ever end, and if it had ever been this long before. He did not remember the creature's body trembling this way when they had landed in the courtyard of the elemental lords, but its strength was definitely waning. He leaned forward to whisper in its ear. "Where have we gone, that exhaustion racks us so?" The great beast snorted, albeit weakly, and its voice was weary when it replied. "We've gone to the end of the known realms, to the last of the once known gods. Coming back from there is always this way for those who make the journey, for we remember who our masters used to be, and the extent of the powers who have gone before. The distance is always longer, and the journey harder on the way back." Adriel accepted its answer, too weary to ask any more questions, and the messenger continued their flight, its wings beating slowly as it bore them through the space between the realms of other gods and other worlds of men. Adriel didn't see as much as he would have hoped, partly because of his own fatigue, and partly because of the messenger's flight path. The creature wove its way between worlds, carefully hiding knowledge from the young god as his masters had commanded. It was a long journey, and their orders had made it longer than it had to be. Yet the words the messenger had spoken to the god remained true. To return to the realms of the outer gods was more tiring than traveling to them. After what seemed like an interminable flight, the creature saw the forested border of Adriel's domain. Within the trees, it knew, would be a wall of the finest mossy marble, and beyond that, a land where new discoveries were stored. Beside that, there was a pool or a rock face for every known realm on the world the new gods called their own. There were places for many more. Even Adriel had not discovered every secret. But then he was only young by the standards of the messenger's masters. The messenger spread its wings, preparing to glide into Adriel's realm. Even as it approached the keep that was the god's home, it felt its strength beginning to truly fail. Adriel must have felt it too, for he cried out, and his realm answered. The messenger felt the power rise to the god's command, and saw Adriel's domain reach out. With resigned apprehension, he felt it wrap itself around them, cradling his body and taking the strain from his wings. Adriel's weight shifted, and he spoke again. "You'll see some hot pools to your right," he told it, pointing. "Land there, and I will have my servants tend your needs." "My lord Adriel," the messenger wheezed, "there is so little time." He felt the god wrap his fingers in his mane, and the god's hand stroke his neck. He wanted to be annoyed at the familiarity of the touch, but knew the god intended the gesture for comfort, not insult. "Fear not, messenger," Adriel replied. "I have other means of transport. I will have to go to the Old One's mountain, and I will have to go there in person, and for that I will use a vehicle other than yourself. You are exhausted from our journey and have done enough." The messenger wanted to argue, but felt its feet touch the ground. The deity's power remained to support it, but that was all that kept it upright. Yielding to its fatigue and the power's gentle urging, the messenger knelt to allow the deity to dismount, and could not suppress the groan of relief as his weight left his back. As Adriel staggered to stand on his own, the full extent of the messenger's exhaustion became apparent. Its hindquarters shuddered and gave way, and it lost the strength to furl its wings. "The journey has taken more of a toll than I expected," it admitted, "even harder when taken so closely to another. How do you fare?" "Well enough," Adriel replied, slowly seating himself on the rock. "I will summon my servants, and with your permission will leave for the last segment of the journey." "Leave then, Adriel, problem solver," the messenger answered, "and may all the gods go with you." Seeing his servants arriving, Adriel motioned them toward the messenger and started to leave the pools. He was stopped when one of his servants hurried into his path and pressed some nourishment into his hand. Taking it, he gave the woman a nod and a brief smile, then stepped around her and continued moving toward the keep. He broke into a run, only to be stopped when a second messenger dropped in front of him. "I can carry you," it offered, but Adriel shook his head. Thank you, but I will take an invention of my own manufacture, he replied. There is no need for you to risk yourself against the power that calls itself Walshira. He continued walking, the messenger's hooves clattering into the keep's courtyard beside him. It stopped when he reached his workshop's double doors and flung them open. Glancing over his shoulder, Adriel saw it flare its wings as its eyes widened in wonder. Moving to his closest contraption, he waved an open hand toward it. Behold! Lord Adriel, the messenger exclaimed, that is most impertinent. Adriel flushed at the reprimand, then shrugged. It is why I haven't dared put it to use, he admitted. But if the likeness is enough to cause you offence, then perhaps the old one will not notice it is merely a contraption when he attempts to destroy it. The messenger studied the contraption for a long, hard moment, and Adriel shifted uncomfortably. You will forgive me, won't you? He asked. The messenger snorted, tossing its head in disgust. This once only, it snapped, irritation giving its voice a sharp edge. Adriel tried to hide his grin of relief, but couldn't. Delight washed over him as he mounted his contraption and uttered the word that would bring his craftsmanship to life. He noticed the messenger duck its head as he passed, almost as though it hid a smile at him, but shook the idea away. The creatures were not known for their sense of humour. Perhaps it was merely trying to hide its relief at not having to face the old one's minions itself. He wasn't privy to the creature's memories, or the knowledge that many of its brethren had been disfigured in the cruel god's games, or had their natures warped until they were beasts of evil intent. Those had become true beasts, with none of their original selves left intact. Just as he wasn't privy to the messenger's memory, so too was Adriel not privy to the fingers of passing grief as it remembered, nor to the wish that the young god find luck on his journey, or the idea that he was very much going to need it. Adriel had only to enter the skies over Deverath to realize the same. Already the darkness that was Walshira's power had spread like a smoky stain to cover Toromar's mightiest city, and spread inky tendrils into the countryside beyond it. He flinched in sudden pain and cried out as he felt the Old One's forces murder one of his priests. The pleas of the remaining priests battered at him, and he sent them the power to do as they requested. If they succeeded, the Older One would have fewer souls with which to feed his power. Grieving their bravery as though they were already lost, the young god flew on. As he did, he sent a double portion of his power to the priests below. It didn't matter if they survived the effects of wielding so much. He would care for them after that, if he could. What he sensed below him made him shudder with anger, apprehension, and pain. Stolana had to be in agony. The Old One was building his forces in Deverath. He was making an army that would not fall apart if his return was delayed. The undead he was creating were going to take the city and obey only one man, the city's king, until Walshira's return. Worse, Adriel realized as he left Walshira's shadow. The Old One was building a force of unliving soldiers that could be used to free him, should his prison once more be secured. The young god hoped the Guardians were preparing for that. The lands passed below him. The god saw the shining grasses of the mirror plains off to his right. He swept over the dank greenery of the torrid swamp. Below him dwelt dragons, but their ravenings had yet to attract the attention of mortal minds, mortal greed, and mortal steel. He sped onward, using words of magic to make his contraption fly faster. He avoided the skies over the land guarded by the Order of the Winged Lynx, travelling instead around the central provinces of Caranth and its allies. The mountain loomed before him, and he drew a sharp breath. He spoke once more, and the messenger-like contraption he rode descended. It landed on the mountain path leading to the citadel. The earth weird struck as soon as he dismounted, but not before Adriel had wrapped his cloak about himself and uttered the final command his creation would ever obey. The word came to the contraption like a storm wind wrapped in a whisper. It was carried on a breath of the god's power and entered the finely crafted nostrils of the mount. His creation screamed in response. its metal plates melding together to form a shiny metallic skin. Adriel's power imbued it with life, the command word having been imbued with part of the god's life force, and Adriel had given it willingly, so his creation might possess a soul of its own. Adriel felt the surge of gratitude sent by the new-made beast, and stopped. He couldn't leave it to die at the claws and jaws of the Old One's monsters. He turned back. His interference, however, was not required. Another roar shattered the hillside, and another force rose from the ground. Another weird, but this one not corrupted by the Old One's power. This one tore free of the ground, then tore the largest of the earth weirds from the battle scene and descended beneath the tumbled earth. Adriel was about to act when it seemed that time froze around him. His creation exploded into action. One metal-edged wing scythed its way across an attacking earth abomination, cutting Walshira's elemental in half. It snapped with gem-formed teeth at a third of the twisted elementals and tore a chunk of earthy flesh from its hide. Needing to ensure it won, Adriel drew 3 of the discs studding his belt and cast them at the third weird. The discs arced out, spinning circles of silver-tinged magic. The first disc carved its way through the weird, bouncing across to another of the monsters. The second disc entered the creature, burrowing deeply before exploding and sending a shower of earthen destruction across the path. The third disc altered course without instruction to take the last of the attacking weirds in the head. Adriel flinched at the gouting explosion that followed, but smiled, seeing his creation still standing and free of attack. It tossed its head and looked toward him, Adriel answering its snort with a small bow. Go then, messenger, Adriel instructed it. Join your brethren and have them instruct you in your duties and privilege. The metallic creature dipped its head in reply, then leapt from the mountainside. Adriel watched as it caught itself with widespread wings, then climbed the sky with swift, sure strokes. When it had winked out of view, Adriel stalked toward the citadel doors. They opened before him, and he didn't stop to work out why. He could see the trail left by the company of mortals. It led him from the shelter of the buildings in the garden, and he broke into a run as he tried to catch them up.